This is the Global Mom Show, episode 32. Hi, I'm Mary Grace Otis. I'm a wife, a mom of 3 boys, a former expat and development worker, and a freelance writer for nonprofits and businesses. I've lived in Germany and India, and I've traveled lots of places besides that. But today I make my home in the U.S., where one of my goals is to stay connected with a global view of life. This is the show that connects you with moms around the world who want to live globally minded lives wherever they are and teach their kids to do the same. Hi everyone! Today I want to share with you my featured resource for the week, and you may have heard it mentioned here before on the podcast, but this is for you moms who may be living far away from your home or who've lived overseas in the past and are seeking ways to build community and gain knowledge about some of the issues affecting families who are expats, missionaries, diplomats, service workers, and so on. The resource is the Families in Global Transition Conference and Forum, which is happening this week in the Netherlands. You can go to their website, which is FIGT.org, and I also suggest that you follow them on Twitter and follow the hashtag FIGT17NL. To hear about everything that's going on at the conference this week, you'll get updates from people who are attending, and you can also look up all the presenters and speakers and get an idea of some of the issues they're talking about. The theme is Building on the Basics, Creating Your Tribe on the Move, and the keynote speaker is Naomi Haddaway, who runs the I Am a Triangle platform. She is going to be on the show in a couple of weeks, and you can go check out her bio right now on the FIGT.org site. Take a look there if you are living or working overseas and you want to connect with other families in your same position. Hopefully that will be helpful to you. For those of you like me who are no longer living overseas, or those of you who have never been outside your home country, I want you to know that you can still incorporate global learning and global ideas into your everyday life. Whether that is something as simple as cooking meals from another country or watching a foreign film with your kids, you can make simple, everyday choices that connect you with global ideas. I outline some of those in my free PDF, 10 Ways to Create a Global Home, no matter where you live. You can get that by going to theglobalmom.com/10ways, and you'll get a free PDF copy of that. Today on the show, I am talking with Christa Jimenez about the commitment that she's made to raise her children to be bilingual. She is living in the U.S., but she's doing a lot of things to keep her 2 girls connected with their heritage. Since her husband is from Costa Rica, she has made a special effort to speak Spanish to them all the time in their home. Christa is the founder of the blog Pura Vida Moms. She's a former Spanish teacher, and she's also the host of an online vlog called BilingualWe. She and I talk about some of the common methods of teaching children another language and how even learning a few phrases can transform a child's brain. Let's get started. Hi, Christa. Welcome to the Global Mom Show.
Hi, Mary Grace. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to get to chat with you a little more.
Me too.
Why don't you start by just introducing us to your family and giving us a little background about yourself?
Well, my name is Christa Jimenez, and I live in Denver with 2 daughters. I have an older daughter who is 3.5, and the baby is 15 months. And I'm married. My husband is Ricardo. We've been married for 11 years now, and he's from Costa Rica. So he immigrated here on a fiancé visa, and we got married about 6 weeks after he arrived, and we've been living in the States ever since. And about 15 months ago, I stopped teaching high school Spanish for native Spanish speakers and started a blog. I was staying home with my kids, and I decided to start a blog about bilingual parenting called Pura Vida Moms. But we focus a lot on travel and just all aspects of just being bilingual and bicultural.
Okay, now you have to backtrack a little bit here and tell me how you met your husband.
Oh.
If you came here on a fiancé visa, there had to be something before that, I'm assuming.
You're exactly right. So in 2001, I was studying at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, and I was kind of trying to decide if I wanted to keep my major in music or add a Spanish major, and some kind of personal things were going on, and I just needed a semester off. So there was this program to the University of Costa Rica in a small town called San Ramon, which is about an hour north of San Jose. And It was, I think, tuition, 7 excursions, room and board, food, everything was $4,000. And so,
Cheaper than a semester at the University of Nebraska, for sure.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of talking about it, and my parents said, yes, you should go. So I went, and I arrived in Costa Rica in January of 2001, kind of when the Bush election stuff was going on. And about 3 weeks into my stay, I went to it was like a university welcome party at a local disco. And I love to dance. And I just saw this really handsome young man dancing and having a really great time. And so I, being the brash American that I was in small town Costa Rica, just walked up to him and said, "Hey, do you want to dance?" And that was kind of it. We've been together ever since.
Ever since. Wow. That's a great story. So how was your Spanish when you got there?
I was with a group of 15 people, and I had studied Spanish in high school and taken a semester in college. So I was probably the most advanced person in my group, meaning I was able to make a collect call home to tell my parents so they could tell the other parents that we made it, because this was really before there was internet in Costa Rica. And I could navigate, I could survive, but it wasn't that great.
So were you taking Spanish classes there?
We were taking it kind of depended on the level of the person, because some of the students were there just to get their Spanish credit out of the way, so they'd get all 4 semesters and study abroad. And some of us were there because we were thinking about declaring a Spanish major. So I took, I think, 5 courses. 3 were lit classes. 1 was a conversation class, and 1 was biology, which was super cool because we did all these field trips and learned all kinds of cool biology stuff, in the biology capital of the world.
Mm-hmm.
So, but my Spanish really got better from my interactions with locals, really. It wasn't so much the course work as it was just speaking it all the time.
And then you decided to ditch the music major and become a Spanish teacher. How did that all happen?
Right. Well, I didn't totally ditch the music major because I had a marching band scholarship. Football's kind of a big deal at the University of Nebraska. And I was on the drum line. So my scholarship depended on me marching every fall. But then I love Nebraska. I love everything about Nebraska, but it's not the greatest place to learn Spanish. And so I would do the fall marching band, and then I would work from like December to February. And then in February, the spring semester would start up in Costa Rica, and I'd fly down and do the spring semester through July. And then I'd be home for like 2 weeks before band camp started. And I did that a few times. And so I had a Spanish major, but I also had a music. I think I ended up getting a minor, and I did not want to be a Spanish teacher. I didn't want to teach. And so I went to Costa Rica because, of course, young love, and I had to be with Ricardo, and he was still finishing college. And so I thought, oh, I'll get some really cool job down there. And I got a job as a Spanish teacher.
You got a job as a Spanish teacher?
An English teacher in a
an English teacher. Okay.
No, I said Spanish teacher. I was kidding. But I got a job as an English teacher in a bilingual school, and it was elementary. It was grades 1 through 5. And I did that for a year, and then it was just really apparent that it's easier to get ahead kind of and start a life and a marriage and all those things, get a really good job here in the States. So I moved back to the States for a year and started teaching high school Spanish while Ricardo finished his last year of college. And then he graduated, I think, May, like the last week in May, and he was on a plane on June 3rd.
Okay. So then you started teaching in the States then?
Yep.
At that point?
I did.
And so how many years have you been teaching before you just quit?
15.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
That's great. So tell us about your blog and the different things that are available on it. You're focusing on bilingualism, and what resources do you have on there?
Yeah, so I'm focusing somewhat on bilingualism, but also on travel, because in part of this going back and forth between Costa Rica and all these different things, I did work as a tour guide in some different national parks around the country. And so I have, all this Costa Rica travel experience that's really rich. And the blog kind of started because of that, because probably twice a week I would get a call either from somebody that I knew who said, "Hey, we're going to Costa Rica. What do you know?" Or someone who would say, "So and so gave me your email address. Can I take you out for coffee and will you tell us about Costa Rica?" And so I kind of started the blog as going, okay, I'm going to tell everybody what they need to know about Costa Rica. But when you have a small children and you're staying at home, sometimes the blogging just has to reflect what's actually happening in your life at the time. And so because I'm raising the girls bilingual, or really primarily in Spanish, it felt more natural to be writing about the different things that I was coming across as I'm raising these children in my non-native language. And I was doing a lot of comparisons to teaching because my job was Spanish teacher, but I taught Spanish for native speakers. So that meant kids who had spoken Spanish at home but had never studied it academically and were basically illiterate in Spanish would enroll in my program from 9th through 11th grade. So I had 3 years to get them up to speed in literacy in what was their first speaking language, but not their non-academic language. So I started to make all these comparisons between my kids and how can I set them up for success in both languages, and it just kind of flowed out of me for writing. And so the BilingualWe aspect of the blog has really taken off just because it's such a passion. But lately I've been beefing up the Costa Rica stuff a little bit. And then my husband said, "Well, why don't you document the recipes that you cook? Because you cook for me just like my mom does." And I said, "All right, I'll throw some recipes on there." Well, those have been the most popular with the Costa Ricans because a lot of people who live here don't know how to replicate their recipes here in the States with the ingredients that we can get. So there's kind of a little bit of everything on there right now. Right now.
Well, tell me about your decision to raise your daughters bilingually, and the fact that you're speaking Spanish all day long to your girls is unique. And what kind of motivated that rather than just having your husband speak to them in Spanish?
That's a really good question. So it's kind of a two-part answer. The first was when we first got married, the job that I got was teaching at Longmont High School, which was ironically the town where I was born, but not where I grew up. So I kind of had this full circle moving back to where I was born and becoming part of this small, close-knit community. And so at the high school, I started to meet kids, and Costa Rica is kind of a popular thing. So long story short, we made friends with all of these bilingual people who were raising their kids bilingual. There was a woman from Spain. There was one from Costa Rica, from Ecuador. And so at this point, I'm not teaching native speakers yet. On my last year at Longmont, I started to kind of as a result of meeting all of these people and realizing that there are all these different models for bilingualism, but also, quite frankly, seeing that only some of the kids were actually bilingual, fully bilingual, like could speak it fluently by the time, they were like in 6th grade. So that kind of got me thinking about, hey, there should be a program for these kids who speak it but don't read it, write it. So I'm starting to develop this program, and through I think, was it 8 years that I developed Spanish for native speakers, I saw all different levels and degrees of bilingualism in my students. And they were all kind of lumped together in this, well, you speak Spanish at home, so we'll just put you in Miss Jimenez's class. She'll figure it out. And, there were all these questions with these kids about their identity and how much Spanish they spoke or could read or write, or all of these different things. And so when I got pregnant with my oldest daughter, I thought, I want her to be bilingual because family is really important to us, and I want her to be able to speak to her whole family. We go to Costa Rica several times a year. I'm really close with Ricardo's family. My parents live really close to us. And so I didn't ever want her to feel like she was missing out on part of her family or her roots or her culture because I made this decision not to raise her bilingually. And I love Costa Rica. I love Latino life, and I love all these things. And so I wanted to pass on something that's a passion of mine to her. So I looked for resources, and there were very few. But I found Spanglish Baby by Ana Flores and Roxana Diaz. And it laid out all these different models of bilingualism. And I read through and I compared that to what experience I'd had with the kids in the classroom. And I noticed that the kids who were truly, truly bilingual without having any educational influence or background, no schooling in it, were just fully conversationally bilingual, were the ones whose parents didn't speak any English at home. And so I said, this is what we have to do if we want our girls to truly be bilingual.
So, I mean, that brings up the question, because you didn't learn Spanish until you were in college, and now you're bilingual. So it is possible for kids or people to get it at an older age. I mean, I'm the same way. I didn't really start studying German until high school, and then, really gained my fluency spent an intensive time over there. But yet, I know that it's much more difficult to learn it at an older age. So what's your take on that?
I mean, I think it can be more difficult, possibly. But then I'm not sure, because my husband didn't speak any English until he moved here. So he was even older than I was. And his English is impeccable now. He doesn't speak Spanish at his job. And so I think that you're right. It's possible to learn it, and if that's what a person wants to do or they're interested in. But there's also this piece that my kids are Latina, and they're half Costa Rican, and their family is monolingual. And so I want them to be fully entrenched in both of their cultures and both of their languages, because it's part of who they are. So for me, it was like a really neat thing, and I learned Spanish, and this is really cool, but I can't imagine what it would have been like if I had gotten to learn Czech, which my grandparents spoke Czech, and it was their first language, and it's lost. No one in our family speaks Czech. So I think about just this kind of idea that it's who they are. So I have a responsibility to give them the foundation. And then, there's been points where my older daughter will rebel and she doesn't want to speak Spanish. And, I have to kind of let that go a little bit and trust that it'll be okay. But I feel like I still have the responsibility to say, this is who you are. And this is part, of your bloodline and your heritage and your culture. And so it's really important that I do everything I can to help you do this.
And what's your husband's role in all of this? What's his vision and his input?
Well, I was just thinking about that, because I've been really leading the charge, and I think he's feeling more like they'll get it. And then as my daughter got a little bit older and got exposed more to English, she started losing her Spanish, and then he started getting worried. So one thing that I really want to do is get more on the same page. I think every couple raising children probably says this about.
I think my husband says that to me once a week. We need to get on the same page. Yeah. We need to get on the same page. I mean, about all variety of things.
All kinds of things. So in bilingualism, I think we do a little bit, because one of the challenges that happens is, so I'm going to go a little tangential, but I'll come back. But my husband's a banker, and so he thinks about things in numbers, and that is really easy to him. So when we sit down and we do our finances, he can just look at it and conceptualize it and say, we need to do this and this. And I feel like I'm trailing behind, oh, well, wait, 2 plus what and equals what? And I think that sometimes that's happening with our girls in the bilingualism, because I'm entrenched in it, and I'm reading, and it's part of my professional 15 years of studying this and looking at it. And so sometimes he'll speak Spanglish, and I'm just livid, and I'm like, how could you possibly do that? And where he's going, why is that bad? And in the moment, we don't have time to deconstruct,
get into it.
And so, but then because he speaks English all day and I speak Spanish all day, at night, sometimes we're just tired. And you'll often overhear conversations between us where I'm speaking English and he's responding in Spanish.
You switch. Yeah.
To our native language. So, so that question about the role is tough, and we've got to come up with a plan and kind of get on the same page. But for now, we're both committed to Spanish only at home.
So your girls know that, and they speak to both of you in Spanish then?
Well, no. I mean, yes and no. We
Working
just
on it.
we
Yeah.
just did a BilingualWe episode on Monday about this of using purposeful language. So my approach has been it's called minority language at home, which means of course in the US, English is the language of power, which means it's how you really get ahead economically, socially, into all these different things. English is the language of power. But being bilingual is very powerful. We just don't always see it that way.
You're
So
doing
I'm doing
minority
minority
language at
language at
home.
home.
Yeah.
So I'm like, we're going to speak Spanish all the time, and that's what we're going to do. But two things kind of hit me upside the head. Number one, well, maybe three, but number one is that all of my interactions and who my like mom friends and my family and my community are all monolingual English speakers. And
Mhm.
so when I jump on the phone or, we go out and we talk to people at the rec center or whatever, all of those interactions are happening in English. And so clearly my children know that I speak English and they know that I'm modeling that for them. And also, them being exposed to kind of my natural discourse and how, I'm fully, fully, fully bilingual, but I feel like mothering is its own language. And so that comes out sometimes. And so I started kind of switching, but not being purposeful about it. And so I think it's causing some confusion with the girls because they know that Poppy always speaks Spanish, even though he can speak English. But with Mommy, they're not sure. So I'm really working now on being more purposeful, and maybe that would let myself off the hook once in a while from always speaking Spanish because it is exhausting for me. It's not
Mhm.
always natural, and there are also pieces of me and my interests and my culture that I want to pass on to them in English.
Right. It's hard to have conversations in English with someone about something you care about and then try to have that conversation with someone else in a different language. I mean,
Mhm.
it's just one of my friends who has raised her children bilingual. She spoke German to them until they went to kindergarten, and she spoke it at home all the time, and that was the only language. And then she said, once they go to school, their whole day is in English, and they can't come home and tell you about their day in a different language. They have to tell you about their day in the language they experienced it in.
Right. Because they don't have that vocabulary.
Right. And that's where it becomes a real challenge. And with her son, it happened earlier because he went to daycare.
Mhm.
So it was kind of like more immediate. But I'm curious because I don't know all the technical terms, and you're an educator. So tell me the different approaches that families can have towards bilingualism in their home.
Yeah, that's a great question. There are two most common, and then there's a third one that people maybe don't know about and I think should be using more. So, minority language at home is where you speak whatever the non-outside world language is at home. And this can be a conscious decision like I made of we're going to speak Spanish with our kids even though we both speak English, or it can be simply because that's the only language that you speak. So a lot of immigrants use minority language at home. It's not purposeful. It's just they're monolingual and it's not in English, so they raise their kids that way. And then the other, I think, most popular model for bilingualism at home is called one parent, one language, or you'll see it a lot as OPOL.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where each parent will speak their native language, or if there's one parent who's bilingual and one who isn't, the parent who is bilingual will speak the minority language always.
Mm-hmm.
And so the kids are it's almost like situationally they're supposed to know who to speak what language to. That gets a little tricky because kids are smart, and so they figured out that mom and dad must communicate.
Right.
And so what often happens is that the majority language gets spoken. And so often one parent, one language kids will be able to understand language but not produce it. Often
Mhm.
minority language at home kids will be able to produce it but are not literate in it. So there's disadvantages to both. But if the conclusion that I came to after doing tons of research was if I wanted my kids to speak Spanish to their grandparents, then I had to do minority language at home, because with one parent, one language, most of those kids don't produce the language unless the parent is truly monolingual. And I have seen some cases of that where the parents don't speak the same language. I had some African students whose parents were from different tribes, and they could communicate kind of in a rudimentary way, but neither parent spoke the same language and neither parent spoke English. So those kids were trilingual. But that's a really, really rare. And then the third model, and it's called a lot of different things. It's not very well known, but it can be situational, contextual, time and place, bilingualism, which is where the parent or the parents have determined a specific time, place, situation, whatever, where the minority language will be spoken. So like my co-host of BilingualWe, Heather, she always does literature in Spanish. All the books in the house are in Spanish. When it's Spanish time, it's reading time. But then beyond that, she doesn't speak Spanish to her son really at all. Some households will do something where maybe like the first 2 weeks of August, they speak Spanish, and then the second 2 weeks, they speak English. Or some people will do, different things. TV is always in Spanish, or dinner conversation or whatever. So I think that's a model that could actually maybe help a lot of people start to get into bilingualism, because it takes the pressure off of like, you always have to speak this one thing to your kid and it's very rigid, and you just determine what time or place or situation will work for your kids.
Okay, so I have a lot of questions here. One is that, I have quite a few friends and quite a few of our listeners who have lived abroad or worked abroad or studied abroad, and they know another language, but now they're back in the States and their spouse does or does not speak that language as well. And they would love for their kid to speak another language, but they don't know how to make it work because it seems unrealistic to speak to their child all day long in that language, or they don't have any other friends that speak that. Mm-hmm. What do you suggest for people in that situation that it's such a challenge to overcome? Like, how do I even integrate this into my home? Where do I even start if nobody else in my circle speaks this language?
Yep. And it often happens with kind of languages that are on the fringe. Like in Denver, there's not a whole lot of German-speaking people, right? Mm-hmm. So, it's kind of easy if you're in that situation in Denver and you speak Spanish, you can find people. But when you've studied this language and you come home and you know it, and then you're not sure how to incorporate it, that's tough. And what I always tell people, and my mantra is that bilingualism is like a spectrum, and it looks different in every household, and the degree of bilingualness that we have our kids come out of our households, right? At their 18th birthday when they're kicked out. Just kidding. But it's a spectrum. It can look like all different things. But what I can tell you is that it's important to be sharing those experiences and the basic words, and just the idea that the world is a bigger place than your community and your family and your school, that it is bigger. Because what we know about bilingualism is that as soon as kids start hearing a second language, whether or not they understand it, whether or not they hear the same language for their whole, 18 years of their development, when they're aware that there are two languages and two ways to say the same thing, their brain is rewired in a different way. And it's rewired to accept this larger perspective and worldview and understanding of others. So that opens up a myriad of possibilities, right? Like maybe you're counting with your kids, or, conversing with them every morning at breakfast, and every morning it's, hi, how are you? How did you sleep? What do you want for breakfast? And that's all they ever get. You are giving them a huge leg up on every other kid, because they already know from birth that there is more than one way to say or do something, and that there are people around the world that do things in a different way. And that's huge, because when I used to teach Spanish 1, every new Spanish teacher goes and they say, here, you can have freshman Spanish 1. and especially in some smaller communities or more affluent districts that I've worked in, the biggest battle there is just getting the kids to understand that there is more than one way to say something, and that Spanish is not this weird, funny thing. it's a real living, breathing language that people use to communicate and to do business and to love and to mother and to shop. And and the kids who get that, who say like, oh yeah, my mom lived in Africa and she taught us how to count, to 30 in French, always excel in language classes. Where the kids who have been like insulated and their parents haven't said anything, and they, because I think as parents, we want to do what's best for our kids, but we also don't want to screw them up. Maybe that's just me.
No, that's everybody.
But
yeah.
so sometimes if it's not perfect or it's not as good as this measuring stick that we have placed on some other person, then we think, well, I just won't do it at all. And as far as bilingualism, nothing is too little. I mean, as long as you're exposing them to something, and even I really admire the parents who don't even speak another language at all, but they wish they had. And so, they're toting their kids over to Spanish story time at the library and they have no idea what's going on, but their kids pick it up.
Yeah.
And so I think that just, it doesn't have to be this really big, formal lifetime commitment, but it's really important to do something, to have that be present in the house in some way.
Well, that's really encouraging to hear, I think, for a lot of people. And, that's kind of been my takes thus far. I mean, I think that my husband and I have always wanted our kids to speak another language, but the reality of actually doing that in a place where there's nobody else speaking it is really challenging. And so I kind of have gone back and forth between like, either you have to make this a total commitment and it just has to, or it's not even worth it, versus saying like, we're going to do whatever we can. And then when the kids get old enough, we're going to ship them off to another country so they can have immersion for a couple months. I mean, because we don't really have foreign language in our schools until they're older, until, high school or something like that. And so, I mean, I know that the best time to teach kids is when they're young, and even for the accent. I mean, talk to me about that. Like what kind of research is there about the accent, and can people really acquire a really good accent when they're older, or what happens when you're younger that's different or better than learning a language when you're older?
Yeah, you're totally exposing a weak point, because I haven't actually delved into that very much about the accent.
Okay.
And maybe some of that is because I'm going to go a little bit on personal experience, right, based on 15 years of teaching Spanish and working with kids. But I think some people just get it and they say the accent and it's great. And some people just never can. And I think that kids who grow up with it young don't seem to have as much problem with an accent, but some kids still do. And actually, those are usually the kids who are kind of teased mercilessly within their community because they're trying to use this accent that everyone else can and they can't. In my case, I just started speaking Spanish like a Costa Rican. If I pick up the phone and call someone in Costa Rica, they have absolutely no clue that I'm not from there until they see me. And really, I didn't start even speaking it until I was 21. But then there are other people who, and they've lived here their whole lives. They started learning English at 15 or 16 and will just always have an accent. So I don't know that piece of it is as much, because I also feel like at least 99% of the time that I've been traveling, whenever I make an effort, no matter how poor the accent is, people are so happy that I made an effort or that I knew something about their language that it's like we can communicate. And to me, language is functional, right? You should be able to communicate, or else why learn it?
Right. Yeah.
Communicate in some way. So the accent piece I don't think is as big as it is just, to me, language learning also teaches tolerance and understanding of other perspectives, which is huge. And I also, on a side note, I think that many of us could agree and need to band together of why are we not introducing language in American public schooling system until, 7th or 9th grade. It doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely.
It doesn't make sense to me.
It doesn't make any sense, except for that it's not a current need, because like you said, English is the language of power. And so a lot of people don't want to let go of that, or don't even see that it's
a need or even a desire. I mean, I think most people have the perspective of language. Well, this is a broad generalization, so I'll just take it for what it's worth. But a lot of people have the perception of language as like, oh, well, that's too hard. I could never do that,
Right.
and they're amazed when people speak more than one language. And for people who grow up in multilingual situations, it's not that hard. I mean, I think learning another language was very hard for me. But at the same time, kind of like you, I mean, I was able to develop an accent that is pretty, people for the most part, don't know where I'm from until I say my name, just like how far can you get into a conversation without saying your name? But still, it's like, oh, ich heiße Mary Grace, like it just doesn't quite work in
Right.
German, but anyway, I mean, I think it seems like a big challenge because it's difficult. It's not easy to go back and forth, and it's not easy to learn. It's not easy to memorize anything as you get older. So, I mean,
Right.
learning things when you're younger. I mean, I think there's obviously a lot of benefits to learning things at a young age. So,
Right, because of course it's hard to learn a language when you're an American, and because we aren't even given the opportunity to start until we're 15, which, cognitively, I taught
right.
my last year teaching. I founded an all girls athletic leadership school, and I was teaching freshman girls, and I had a 2-year-old, and I swear a lot of the days they acted exactly the same. Because 14, 15, our brains kind of go into this, like the hormones and the emotion takes over, and we're not even really as able to learn and absorb things. A lot of those kids were relying on previous knowledge of things, and we're reinforcing that knowledge. But why start a language then, as opposed to starting it in kindergarten? But really, really having a language program in kindergarten, not just we count and we do the alphabet once a week and that's our Spanish class,
Mm-hmm.
but really learning it. And I think that brings up the piece of bilingual schooling as well, which there's a pretty big resistance to bilingual schooling here in Colorado. And so for me as a parent, I think that I have to do all of this at home also, because it's going to be really lucky if I'm able to get my daughter into a bilingual school. And
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be a huge effort there, with the travel or the fees or, whatever that means for our family or will mean. And I think bilingual schools can be a huge partner for parents who are working to keep their kids
Right.
bilingual.
What are some ways for people whose children are in a dual language situation at school, for people at home who maybe don't speak that language at all, to reinforce that language at home? What are some resources that they should incorporate?
That's a great question. I think that incorporating language through technology, I'm not an anti-screen time person. I'm a
Mm-hmm.
screen time with reservation person. So I think that some of the apps that we have now, or the television that we have access to, DVDs, all of these different things that we have access to are a huge complement to what our kids can be learning in a dual language school. So here there's a language school that's immersion Spanish and Mandarin Chinese, and a lot of the parents there don't speak Mandarin, but they know that their kids should. And so a lot of the parents are developing like pen pal relationships or email relationships with people in China, or they're you can switch Skype to so many different, not Skype, Netflix to so many different languages. So their kids are getting into TV series that are popular in China and different things. It doesn't have to be that I necessarily speak Mandarin to be able to support my kid. But I think the most detrimental thing is when parents say, I don't know and I can't help you. And then their own feelings of inadequacy kind of stop that kid from bringing home maybe the frustrations of learning the language, or maybe some of those questions. But as a parent, if you're just saying, you can do this and I'm going to support you, and it's an opportunity that I didn't have and I want for you, and we're going to, we're going to find the village, then those kids, dual language schools, they know what they're doing, and they're used to working with a good one anyways, are used to working with parents who maybe are not bilingual but want that for their kids. And so also just using the teachers as advocates and as partners, because teachers are bilingual teachers are incredible people. And we want kids to feel secure and excel in what they're doing. And so it's important also just to rope in the teachers and the people in the school and ask their advice, have a continuing conversation with them as well.
Mm-hmm. Great ideas. Well, we don't have a whole lot of time left, but I want to find out from you a little more about what the BilingualWe program is.
BilingualWe is a live vlog, a video log that we do once a week in 6-week chunks for a series, and then we take a couple weeks off to regroup. And I say we, my co-host is Heather Robertson Devine of Books Del Sur, and she is a dual language teacher that also imports high quality Spanish language books. The first series of 6 weeks, we did a different bilingual model each week, and we highlighted what that model is, what it can look like, some problems that arise with it, and some of the benefits. But we base everything that we do in educational research. So we find the best articles and research and all of that online, and we take the educational teacher speak and we put it in layman's terms for a dual purpose. One, so that people can be informed about what decisions they're making for their kids and how they can find the best model. And two, so that they can advocate for their kids in schools. Because a lot of times, and this happened with my daughter, we sent her to preschool and she was being bullied because she didn't speak very much English at all when she started. And the teacher wasn't really sticking up for her and defending this bilingualism. So as a parent, I was able to go in and say, these are what her educational needs will be. This is where her strengths are, etc. Mm. So first series was just, you can go through and hear a different model that I talked about. And now the second series, we're really looking at what are the resources out there for the types of bilingualism that you've decided to have at home? And that ties back to our Facebook group, which is basically just a group of people who are trying to do this bilingual thing and not always sure what to do and just supporting each other. So the idea behind it is it's just a really welcoming, positive place for people to come and say, hey, I'm trying to be bilingual. This is what's working. This is what's not. What do you know that I don't? And for Heather and I to also say, what do you know that we don't? And how can we all learn from each other? And so far, it's just been super positive.
Tell us how we can catch those videos.
You can find me on Google+, everything across all the platforms. I'm Pura Vida Moms, which is PURAVIDA Moms.
Okay, what does that mean?
It means,
since I don't speak Spanish.
Yeah, it means, it's the Costa Rican national saying. It means pure life. It's all good. Everything's wonderful, cool, awesome, all positive things.
Great.
And so the idea was just to have a really positive group of moms supporting each other. So you can find that on my website is puravidamoms.com. My YouTube channel is Pura Vida Moms. And then Facebook is the BilingualWe community. We're just looking for other people who are exploring any type of bilingualism on the spectrum, from uno, dos, tres, all the way to like, I'm a bilingual die hard. And this is what's happening at my house.
Great. Well, thank you so much for getting our feet wet into this topic and telling us a little bit more about your interest and your family. I really appreciate you coming on the show today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm really excited to tune in and hear the next shows, because there's always so much more to learn about bilingualism and dual language. So thank you for opening this conversation to a really wide group of people. I really love your mission.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Okay.
Yeah,
Bye-bye,
okay.
Christa.
Bye.
Thanks for listening today. I hope that you gleaned some ideas from this that will inspire you to at least attempt to get some second language exposure in the life of your child. You can find links to everything here in the show notes. And if you want to listen to another episode about language learning and raising bilingual kids, check out episode 26. That's Bringing Up a Bilingual Child with Rita Rosenbach. You'll find that and all the other episodes at theglobalmom.com. You can leave your feedback there, either as a comment or an email, or by leaving me a message in the little red box on the side that says leave voicemail. I would love to hear from you. Find me on Facebook and Twitter at The Global Mom, on Instagram at The Global Mom Show, and subscribe to get personal emails from me by texting the words Global Mom to 444999. I send out emails every week or two that have some of my favorite things I'm learning or discovering, or resources that I'm finding from around the web. So you'll want to get in on that. The Global Mom Show is supported by fans and listeners who want to keep the global conversation going. If you would like to support the show, one of the easiest ways to do that is by doing your regular shopping on Amazon using the Global Mom Show's link. Just go to theglobalmom.com/Amazon whenever you shop, and you won't be charged anything extra, but the show will get a tiny commission for every purchase. If you want to find out more ways to support the show, go to theglobalmom.com/support, and you'll find a variety of simple ways that you can support the show. Thanks again for joining me here today. Remember, you can live a global life wherever you are and teach your kids to do the same.